Food for Thought relies on listeners like you. Thank you for valuing this podcast and keeping it going by supporting it at joyfulvegan.com. You can just click on donate, or you can go to patreon.com/Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. Today's topic is animal lookalikes, how to tell the difference between commonly confused animals. Welcome to Food for Thought, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. My name is Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. I am your host. This podcast is brought to you by listeners, but today's episode is supplemented by support from Plain Products, a vegan-owned company offering cruelty-free, zero-waste personal care products free of animal products. They offer shampoos, conditioners, body washes, lotions, and more. They package all of their personal care products in eco-friendly, refillable bottles that you return empty when you're done. You get a prepaid label for that, by the way. They sanitize them, refill them, and quite literally close the loop on waste. Visit joyfulvegan.com/hair to get 15% off of all of your Plain products anytime you use that link, and the code is over there as well. This link and discount code is also in the show notes for this episode. Hi everyone, I hope you're doing fabulously well. Since last I was here, we have confirmed our 2025 trip to the Dordogne Valley in France and our 2025 trip to Croatia. They both have space available, but we reached our minimum to confirm both. We reached our minimum for the Dordogne Valley in a few days, and we are going 100% going. Also, we had a great turnout for my Easy Vegan Ramen online cooking class. It's now available for purchase as an on-demand class with all the recipes and the class video. You'll learn how to make the most important component of ramen, which is the broth. And ours is a spicy, umami, rich broth, though I do provide a mild option as well. We have miso glazed tofu, grilled corn without a grill, super helpful, garlic chips, which are heavenly and addictive, and toasted sesame seeds. You can get your recipes at joyfulvegan.com, and you can find out more about the all-inclusive trips at joyfulvegan.com. Just click on vegan trips. Now on to our topic, which I've been working on for a while now, and I thought would be fun. I thought it would just be a light, fun episode to do. You are going to be a smarty pants after this episode, and you're probably going to annoy your friends and family, because by the end, you're going to have in your back pocket, at the ready, top of mind, helpful ways to remember the difference or differences between 10 pairs of animals we commonly confuse. So for each grouping, I'm also going to talk briefly about the challenges and risks they face and how you can help. But mostly this is about how to tell the difference between ravens and crows, bees and wasps, bison and buffalo, crocodiles and alligators, and many, many more. So let's start with crocodiles and alligators, two apex predators whose ancestors survived the extinction of the dinosaurs 66 million years ago. Crocodiles are considered to be 200 million years old, so they've been around a long time, and alligators have been around 37 million years. There are key differences between them, and I thought it might be helpful. Not that it's going to make a difference if you are threatened by them and need to run for your life, but it's just one of those things where I'm always like, wait, so is it alligators or crocodiles in Florida? Who are the what? That's what we're going to talk about. So the most noticeable distinction between alligators and crocodiles lies in their snouts. Crocodiles have longer V-shaped snouts, and alligators have shorter U-shaped snouts. Okay, so how are you going to remember that? So one of the ways I remember that is by the first letter of crocodile, which is C, and V, which is the shape of their snout. So a CV, like, a resume, CV. So CV is how I remember crocodiles, V-shaped, and alligators, U-shaped. I don't need a mnemonic for alligators because I just use it for crocodiles. So that's the main thing. When you just kind of look at an alligator versus a crocodile, you can tell the difference that way. CV, crocodiles, V-shaped. Now, another way to tell the difference, if their jaws are closed, and mostly they are, unless they're, attacking someone, is when their jaws are closed. With crocodiles, you can see their upper and lower teeth. So you can see their teeth from their upper and lower jaws in crocodiles when their mouths are closed. Alligators, you can't see their teeth. Finally, in terms of appearance, we have their color. Now, the color can definitely vary depending on the species and their environment, but there is a color difference between crocodiles and alligators. Crocodiles usually have a lighter olive brown or a grayish green, so kind of more on the green side, and it's a bit more rugged, the texture, where alligators are often darker. They often appear kind of blackish or grayish. So think of your kind of typical green. I mean, whenever a child draws an alligator or a crocodile, they're usually green, right? So crocodiles would be more of the olive green side. Alligators are more kind of blackish, grayish. They're a lot darker. So those are three ways to kind of tell them an appearance. In terms of habitat and location, let's talk about location because that'll get us into habitat. So globally, crocodiles live in tropical regions in Africa, in Asia, in Australia, and in the Americas. Alligators are found in the Americas and eastern China. That's it. Alligators are not in Africa. So if you ever go on a safari anywhere in Africa, you're seeing crocodiles, not alligators. So crocodiles live in just more diverse continents. Alligators are limited to pretty much the Americas and eastern China. Now I'm talking about wild crocodiles and wild alligators. It's not to say that people don't have alligators in Africa if they're somehow, keeping them in some kind of exhibit. Same thing anywhere else around the world. But typically, crocodiles are in Africa, Asia, Australia, and the Americas, and alligators are found in the Americas and eastern China. Now, one of the reasons I think I confuse them all the time is because in Florida, it's the only place where both crocodiles and alligators coexist, particularly in the Everglades National Park. So alligators and crocodiles coexist in Florida, in South Florida. And in fact, in the Everglades, it's the only place in the US where you see crocodiles. Again, in the wild. That doesn't mean people aren't exhibiting crocodiles elsewhere in the US, but in the wild, the Everglades is the only place in the US you see crocodiles. Other than that, if you go to Africa, if you go to Australia, that's where you can see crocodiles, but in the US, it's only in the Everglades, which I think is really interesting. And one of the reasons it works for crocodiles is because there's a mix of freshwater and saltwater, because it's an oversimplification, but alligators typically prefer freshwater. Crocodiles typically prefer saltwater. So they're in coastal regions, whereas alligators are mostly in freshwater lakes. They can tolerate saltwater for a small amount of time, alligators, but they need to return to freshwater to drink, etc. Okay, so I hope that clarifies it for me, at least. The only place you're going to see crocodiles in the US is in the Everglades in Florida, and in Florida is where you see both alligators and crocodiles. And so other southern states do have alligators, and that includes Georgia, South Carolina, other parts of the South, but you're not going to see crocodiles there unless they've been they're captive. Okay, behavior. Both are considered aggressive. These are just pretty intense animals. Alligators are generally less aggressive than crocodiles. Crocodiles are known for being a lot more territorial, and they are more likely to attack humans if they feel threatened. So that's kind of how I think crocodiles are a bit more intense, but they're both aggressive. You don't want to pet either one of them. So steer clear if you see what looks like either a crocodile or an alligator. You don't want to get too close to actually find out. So just take my word for it. From afar, you should be able to see their snouts. You should be able to tell their color. You'd be able to tell if they're in saltwater or freshwater. So you'd be able to make those distinctions from far enough away that you remain safe. Challenges they face, I named captivity as one of them, of course. There's illegal hunting, there is mistreatment in captivity because especially alligators are used for these ridiculous alligator sports, these alligator, games. They're also killed for their skin, for their meat, for other body parts. So ways you can help is make sure you are supporting Conservation efforts, for sure. Habitat loss is a case with so many of these animals we're going to talk about. Work on legislation to stop the illegal pet trade. That would be the case with alligators and the wildlife trade. And you can educate folks about this. And of course, you can make sure that you're not buying leather, from crocodile. So crocodile accessories, purses, shoes, that kind of thing, and you can raise awareness about that. So those are some of the issues regarding alligators and crocodiles. Okay, let's move on to an animal who can be a threat to you pretty frequently. And if you don't know the difference, you don't know whether to kind of avoid or kind of not worry about it. And those are bees and wasps. Bees and wasps. Now, in terms of appearance, bees, so again, appearance, this ties into habitat also, but bees typically are fat. We have a lot of fat bees. So they tend to be kind of hairy. They tend to be fatter, more robust, rounded bodies. They tend to have shades of brown, shades of black, shades of yellow, whereas wasps tend to be more slender. They're smoother, so less hair. They have a narrow waist, and they have that vivid black and yellow pattern. Now, there are thousands of species of each, so I'm giving you kind of generalizations, but I think that might be helpful for you to understand. The appearance of bees is related to their behavior, because the reason they're fuzzy and furry is because it helps with pollen collection. Whereas wasps are smoother and shinier, they're not collecting pollen the way bees are. So that's why you have kind of hairier bodies on the bees. Also, because bees are the ones who are collecting pollen, you're going to see them around flowers. They're collecting the nectar, they're collecting the pollen, where wasps are more scavengers. And so they're kind of scavenging for food all over the place. They're scavenging for food in other insects, and they're scavenging for food among humans. So if you're having a picnic and someone's flying around you and buzzing around you, it's most likely a wasp. Wasps are more aggressive. They tend to be attracted to food, especially sugary food, while bees are just more kind of focused on collecting nectar, and they're more likely to be around flowers. Now, if you are allergic to bees, you're probably allergic to wasps, and vice versa, and you're going to have a reaction. So if you're someone who's allergic, you're going to want to avoid both. But there are many, many times where I'm in my gardens and I'm around flowers, and there's little, flying creatures, and I know they're bees because they're around the flowers. I'm not allergic to bee stings. I don't want to be stung by a bee, but I'm not allergic to them. So I'm just not as worried. I mean, I could stand near a shrub that has flowers and bees are buzzing all around. And unless I'm a threat to them, they're not really going to attack me. I'm not saying like I hang around and like put my face in them or, pick them up. But the point is, if you're not allergic and you don't have to worry as much about having a reaction if you are stung, if you see bees around flowers, they're really not going to most likely attack you unless you're attacking their hive. And with wasps, they're probably going to sting you, and they both have stingers. So there's always that question about what happens with the stinger if they do sting you. So they're both motivated for different reasons. Bees tend to sting defensively. So as I said, if you're threatening them, if they're protecting their hive and you're a threat, they're going to most likely sting you. After stinging you, the bee, their stinger, it does stay in your skin, and he dies. Whereas with the wasp, they can sting multiple times. I think we've all maybe experienced that. They don't die. Their stingers do not become embedded, and they can sting you several times. And wasps will sting you more kind of offensively, less defensively. They're just a bit more aggressive. So again, especially if you're eating food, that's kind of the best way to say it. If there is a flying, buzzing insect around you when you're eating food, it's most likely a wasp. So you probably want to just, shoo him away, or go away, or put your food away, because they're going to keep bothering you. Wasps tend to be they're carnivorous predators, and so they're hunting insects and spiders and other creatures, and they're also looking for your food. Whereas bees, they're eating pollen for the most part to feed their larvae and to produce honey as a food source. So those are the big differences that you're going to be able to tell kind of as you look at them. There are social structure differences, but I think in terms of kind of being able to tell the difference, those are the most important things to note. In terms of challenges, of course, pesticide use on flowers and gardens and shrubs and trees. Habitat loss is a huge, huge issue. Climate change, diseases. But I will say there was a really interesting study recently, I think I read it in National Geographic, where the researchers are looking at what is a bigger threat to bees, and whether it's habitat loss or pesticide use. And actually it was habitat loss. So I've said again and again and again and again, if you want to help bees, if you want to help these pollinators, and you're going to be helping other pollinators like hummingbirds and butterflies as well, if you want to help any pollinator plant flowers, create habitats for them, including bee hotels. You can find that online, how to do that. You can buy bee hotels or you can just build them yourself. Not clearing all of your, not having a perfect manicured lawn, not having a perfectly manicured garden. There are so many different species of bees. And if you want to support wild bees, which we should be doing more of, and not just honeybees, well, we shouldn't be supporting honeybees the way we have been. We need to support wild bees. And some of them are ground dwelling. Some of them are live in kind of hotels. Some of them kind of, and then some live in hives, obviously. So the best thing we can do is create habitats for them. Plant pollinator friendly flowers, reduce pesticide use. So I'm not saying to use pesticides, but I am saying that if we want to prioritize helping bees, get those habitats going. And you can, if you have a small space, and I have other podcast episodes about this, you can listen to more in other podcast episodes. One of them is called Keep Flowers, Not Bees, How to Save Bees Without Eating Honey, because there's a real myth that the way to support pollinators is to eat honey. No. And I talk about that in that episode. There's also a podcast episode I did several years ago called Setting Boundaries, Reading Chaucer and Talking Bees. So I think that was, God, so long ago. I mean, that must have been 10 years ago, maybe more. But I talk about some expressions we have, like, kind of like busy as a bee and the bee's knees, and what those expressions mean and where they come from. So if you want more on bees, I do have other bee related episodes in Food for Thought. Okay, moving on to another pair of animals who are typically confused, or they're not confused. We typically confuse the difference between the two. And that is dolphins and porpoises. So both are intelligent marine mammals. Both are known for playful behavior. Both are known for having sleek bodies, but there are differences between the two. And once again, we have the snouts. So we can tell the difference between dolphins and porpoises by their snouts. And like crocodiles, dolphins have elongated beak-like snouts. They're not necessarily a V shape, but they're more elongated. They're more beak-like. And when I was thinking of a mnemonic, I was thinking of, okay, dolphin starts with D and their snouts are kind of like a dart. That's kind of one of the things that makes them aerodynamic through the water, swimming through the water. So D for dart for dolphin. Porpoises have, as I said, kind of more rounded snouts. And I don't know, porpoises, if you want to have a mnemonic for that, plump, I don't know, puffy. But if you just remember D for dart, for dolphins, you don't necessarily need a mnemonic for porpoises. Plump, I don't know, plump, fine. But it's specifically around their snouts. They're not plump. Their bodies are not more plump. Behavior-wise, there is a difference, and it's the difference that is actually what is problematic for dolphins. Dolphins are known to be sociable. They're known to be just playful. They are the animal you will see swimming alongside boats or swimming alongside whales. They are curious, and that's one of the reasons they're used for aquatic parks, for entertainment schemes. like swimming with dolphins, same thing. I know that people will say, oh, I swam and dolphins came up to me. That's probably true. Dolphins would be more curious and they would be more playful and less afraid of humans. But any kind of scheme where you're swimming with dolphins, I can tell you that the dolphins are not doing that on their own. They're being lured with food and other things to keep coming around the humans. So if you happen to be snorkeling and a dolphin comes by, that's one thing. Or, in your scuba diving, fine. But if you go specifically to a place that is for swimming with dolphins, they tend to be problematic. You wouldn't find porpoises in those cases. They are less likely to engage in this behavior. So if you see, and frankly, if you see what looks like either one, it's most likely a dolphin, just by virtue of them being more social. Porpoises would, kind of just be a bit more reserved, and you wouldn't see them as much. The habitat for both of them, dolphins their habitat includes both coastal and open ocean waters around the world. They tend to be more prevalent in warmer tropical waters and temperate waters. They can be found in colder regions, but porpoises tend to be in colder, more subarctic waters, more temperate. So you can find them in coastal areas. You can find them in bays and estuaries. Porpoises are just less likely to be in tropical regions compared with dolphins. Okay, so hopefully those are helpful distinctions. I think they are. They've helped me, those distinctions. As far as the threats, of course, habitat loss sadly is a thread that runs through the threats to all of the animals we're talking about. What can we do about that? We can do a lot about that. I mean, we can protect areas around us. We can be involved in policies that protect animals in our regions, in our towns, in our countries, globally, etc. So a lot of that will be policy, legislation, who we vote for, that kind of thing. We can also get involved in rewilding schemes. There's a lot of really exciting work being done for rewilding around the world, so you can get involved with that. Other threats they face certainly are climate change and also bycatch. A lot of us, for a long time, we've heard about, dolphin-friendly tuna, that kind of thing. So they are, both of them, victims of bycatch. So fishing, if you're concerned about that, of course, there's laws that can be passed to make regulations around fishing more stringent, including fines and regulations. But if you're also concerned, then perhaps don't eat fish, because it is one of the things that lots of other animals suffer because of fishing. I have to say, I just saw something really interesting this morning. This is a complete aside. One of the issues with fishing is not just fishing. Of course, it's an issue ethically and in terms of, animal cruelty, but in terms of, the environment. One of the awful things is the trawls, the trawling that just basically takes these huge nets that run along the bottom of the seafloor, and it just picks up all of these animals who were not the target animals, but they die anyway. And of course, it's ruining habitats and algae and all of the food that is part of the ecosystem. So these big trawlers are hugely problematic. I just saw, because I follow a lot of good news sources, and this is in one of my good news sources, and I shared some of these sources in a recent newsletter. And you can reach out to me if you want to know some of these sources that I look to. But there was a great story about a fisherman. You might not like it because it's still a fisherman who, has been fishing in this part of Italy for hundreds of years. Well, not him specifically, but his family and his people have been fishing in this region. And, it's small scale fishing. It's not these trawlers that come in and just ruin everything. And so there's a project to hinder these trawlers. Here's how they do it. I thought this was just absolutely fascinating. They bought I think that, either whoever it was sponsored by, they purchased a ton of marble, and they had sculptors create these beautiful sculptures and that are made of marble, so you can't move them. And they put them on the bottom of this region, this part of the ocean that these fishermen live near. And what it does is it stops the trawlers from being able to trawl, because the nets that are under these big trawler boats, those nets would get caught on these statues that are at the seafloor. And if they can't detach the net, that the big trawling net, then the trawler boat would sink. So these trawlers, it has worked. These trawlers can't go to this region anymore to trawl because of these statues. And so algae is growing on these statues. Turtles have come back in this area, and other animals. And this particular plant that supports a lot of these animals is now growing because the trawlers aren't just taking up everything on the seafloor. It's so cool. And they look so haunting. Like, these statues are so haunting because the sculptors made these sculptures so that they look like, kind of wounded sea mermaids and mermen and that kind of thing. Anyway, it's really, really, really interesting. So I really I'm happy to share that story with you, but you can search for it online if you're interested. So yeah, that's kind of cool. Anyway, there's also large scale dolphin hunts. We know that in Japan, Faroe Islands, Peru, there's mass killings, and contributes to the population decline. So there are things we can do. We can support organizations who are protecting marine wildlife. We're combating the dolphin hunts. We can reduce plastic use because we can minimize ocean pollution that way. We can avoid products and practices that contribute to habitat destruction. We can not consume animal products. We can also not be part of animals that practices entertainment that exploits these animals. So not going to places like aquatic parks where dolphins are performing. We can educate people. We can advocate for policies that make these changes in the laws. So there's a lot we can do if we want to help dolphins and porpoises. And what's the main difference? Their snout. Dolphins have a dart-like snout. Okay, moving on to turtles and tortoises. Both reptiles, both have hard shells, but they do have significant differences in their lifestyles, in their habitats. So on sight, the easiest way to tell them apart is kind of, again, knowing their habitat. So knowing where you would find one or the other, and then you could make an educated guess about whether it's a tortoise or a turtle. And I'm going to include the habitat and physical features together because one determines the other. So turtles generally live in water, whether freshwater or marine, and thus they have more streamlined, flatter shells that are suitable for swimming. Their legs are often webbed or equipped with flippers. In contrast, tortoises tend to be land dwellers, so their shells are more domed and they're heavier because they're designed for terrestrial life, which provides protection against predators and the elements. They have sturdy elephant-like legs that are well adapted for walking on land. So you can tell pretty quickly if you're seeing what looks like one or the other on land, walking around with big legs. Those are tortoises. Turtles, if you're in the water, it's most likely going to be a turtle. Those are kind of the main differences. The size differences can vary, but tortoises tend to be larger. And of course, some are quite large. Some species grow to very impressive sizes. If you've ever been to the Galapagos, there's the Galapagos tortoise, and they're massive. So typically tortoises are larger. Turtles, especially the aquatic ones, tend to be smaller on average, but there are exceptions. The leatherback sea turtle can be quite large, but typically they're smaller. But if you're in the water and there's a web-footed animal, kind of swimming around, and he's large, like a leatherback turtle, it's going to be a turtle, not a tortoise. The turtles are omnivorous or herbivorous depending on the species, and they may eat a variety of plants and insects and possibly small animals. Tortoises, however, they're primarily herbivores, and they feed on vegetation such as grasses and leaves and flowers. The challenges both face, both of them are at risk of extinction, many species of each. They are very endangered, both of them. They both face habitat loss. They both face challenges because of global warming and climate change, especially when their nests are affected, their nesting sites, and their food availability. Their eggs are often collected for food. The turtles themselves are often taken for food, and the pet trade, the illegal wildlife trade, again, poaching. There's a lot of illegal poaching and illegal trade that threaten their populations. They're targeted for their shells, they're targeted for their meat. Sea turtles are at great risk for bycatch. So again, if you're interested in helping both tortoises and turtles, we want to support conservation organizations that are protecting their habitat, that are reducing pollution, that is looking to mitigate, organizations that are working to mitigate climate change. We want to reduce plastic to minimize pollution. I am going to be talking in my book that is hopefully coming out next year, my book called A Year of Compassion. I am talking about plastic pollution. And it's worth saying that if you live in a region where there are very good waste management practices and policies, it's less likely that your waste, your plastic bag, is going to wind up in the ocean. But there are things we can do to support, economically developing countries from having better, to have better waste management infrastructure, because it is mostly plastic pollution from less economically developed nations that mean that plastic will wind up in the ocean. Now, you could be in an economically developed nation and plastic is still getting into the ocean. How? When there's plastic waste on the beaches. So beach cleanups is definitely something you can do to help all of these aquatic animals. And of course, you can advocate for policies and laws that protect these animals and their environments. So lots we can do. A related podcast episode I was noting when I was writing this is one, it's in Animology, the Animology podcast, and it's called Geographical Place Names with Animal Origins, which I find very fascinating. And there is a place, I actually kind of named it already, where it was named after a tortoise. So you can go listen to that episode. All of the Animology episodes are still there for the listening. I'm just not making any more new ones. I'm incorporating language related episodes here in Food for Thought. Okay, let's move on to the fifth category. And that is a category I think a lot of people confuse. It's ravens and crows. It happens almost every day, because we have ravens and crows both around us. And whenever I'm hiking with people and we see one, they're, is that a raven? Is that a crow? Okay, we're going to talk about ways to learn the difference between ravens and crows. And if you've listened to this podcast for any length of time, I love corvids so much. I love ravens. I love crows. I love jays. I love them so much. And so they are both large birds. They are both intelligent birds. They both belong to the corvid family, but they do have that are harder to tell, but they do have distinct physical characteristics and behaviors. And if you see either, especially in the US, you're looking at either a common raven or an American crow. Those are their species. Okay, so pay attention to this one because I think they're hard to differentiate and I want you to be a smarty pants and know the difference. So let's start with the most obvious. Let's start with their physical appearance. Let's start with how they look. Now, ravens are larger than crows. Now, that's hard. For me, it's hard that doesn't help all the time because relative to other birds, they're so much larger. So it's maybe hard to know the difference if you see one when there's no other birds around. But ravens are definitely larger than crows. They have larger wingspans. They have longer, thicker bills. So in general, ravens are just kind of larger in all ways. Their bills, their wingspans, their body. Okay. On ravens, the nasal feathers extend a bit more down the beak. Now, this is if you're getting close enough, so that might not be helpful. So, okay, let's do something else. Their tails. Now, this is definitely something that's going to be helpful when they're above you, when they're flying, is to tell the difference based on their tails. You can kind of tell also when they're just walking around, but you have to pay attention. Ravens have wedge-shaped tails, and they're more robust. They're definitely wider. And crows have fan-shaped tails. How to remember that? I don't know if you think about wedges very often, but crows have more rounded tails, so like the fan, more rounded, and ravens have a more pointed tail. Here's how I've been able to remember this, is a crow that starts with a C has a C-shaped tail. C for crow. And ravens have a V-shaped tail, and there's a letter V in the word raven. So I've been using that mnemonic, and it's been helpful because I have struggled with this myself, and these are animals I love, and I still struggled. So again, crows have a C shape, so like more of a fan. It's a softer, rounder shape on crows. So C shape, crow. And ravens have more of a V shape, and there's a V in raven. So I hope that helps. It's helped me. Vocalizations, so you will hear them very often. I hear them all the time. Ravens have a deeper, more guttural croak, and crows have a higher pitched caw, similar to a jay, but jays are even more high-pitched. So crows have a higher pitched caw, ravens have a deeper guttural. So when you think of ravens, they're just kind of bigger, deeper, like kind of more robust all around. And that includes in their voice. Crows, higher pitched caw. Now, caw and croak both start with C, so that's not very helpful as a mnemonic, but so what I started using was the word raspy. So ravens have a raspier vocalization. Raspy, raven, caw, crow. And there's a W in both caw and crow. And raspy starts with an R and raven starts with an R. So that's what I've been able to use. So if you hear and you can hear it, like you can hear this kind of raspy croaking in a raven. And if you're hearing a caw and you see the black birds around, it is a crow. It is a crow. I did mention already, when you see them in flight, look for their C-shaped back tail feathers, right? And that's the crow. And the V-shaped back tail feathers is the raven. Ravens also display more varied and dynamic flight behaviors. They soar, they glide, they perform acrobatic maneuvers. If you've ever seen them tumble and roll, they do that in the sky. Those are ravens. Their flight is generally more erratic with greater range of motion. In contrast, crows have a more consistent, C for consistent for crow, more consistent direct flight style. They tend to flap their wings steadily and maintain a more predictable flight path, less soaring and fewer aerial tricks. So those are the crows. The challenges both face: habitat loss, pollution, poisoning, because they are part of the food chain. And if you're poisoning a smaller rodent or anyone else, the ravens and crows are going to eat them as well. So that's problematic. Deforestation, obviously, again, habitat loss is a huge one. And when they're targeted as pests and they're poisoned, that's a big one as well. So how to address that? Again, raise awareness, make sure you're not putting out traps and poison, make sure you're supporting local conservation efforts as well as broader conservation efforts, and, raise awareness about mitigating human-wildlife conflict, because that's a big one. I know sometimes that ravens and the corvids aren't well loved by birders often because they can be a bit bullyish, both of them. The jays too, all the corvids tend to be very big personality birds, and they can, impact the smaller birds and their nests. So sorry about that. But yeah, that's not something we can control, not necessarily. There are some podcast episodes I have on all of these animals. I have one called A Kindness of Ravens, to kind of changing up the words, because they're typically called a murder of ravens, and I kind of unpack the history of that expression in this episode called A Kindness of Ravens, even though I just said that they weren't very kind. Anyway, I listened to the episode for my argument. Words from our black feathered friends, so another language related one. Then I have an episode called Jim Crow and Zip Coon, the animals in racial stereotypes, I think is very interesting. And I have one called Eating Crow, Try Eating Humble Pie Instead. So more expressions that come from these animals. Hi everyone, just taking a quick break to thank supporters before we get on to our sixth category. I want to thank everyone who's still supporting me. Patreon membership has been dwindling by the day, and I don't quite know why. Perhaps this is a model that just doesn't work anymore. I've considered changing the model to a one-time annual fee for membership, and it's just locked into either, kind of a basic or a premium membership, and just having two, and it's an annual membership fee, as opposed to this monthly fee, which is really sporadic and not very consistent. I'm still generating as much content as ever, but the support for that content has gone down to almost nothing. I'm not sure how much longer I can keep doing this. It's not a sustainable model. I know you're hearing of the sponsorship of plain products, which has absolutely helped, but it does not cover the expenses for the work that I do. So just consider becoming a supporter if you still want to support this work and you still want to hear these podcasts episodes. I'm grateful to all of you who are still supporting, and I understand that things change. I really do, but I'd like to hear your feedback about what you think a model would be to sustain my work doing this, and what would work better for you. I'm looking at other options. Any one of them is going to require an infrastructure change. So that is also overwhelming, especially if it doesn't work, and it will cost money to do that. So just consider becoming a Patreon supporter. If everybody who's listening just contributed $5 a month or $10 a month, and you can just pay in one annual fee, that would just cover so many of my expenses to do this work. And I'd appreciate it so much. So go to joyfulvegan.com/donate. You can make a one-time contribution, or you can become a Patreon supporter, or just go to patreon.com/Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. Thank you so much. Now moving on to amphibians, frogs versus toads. They both have similar appearances. There are subtle differences between these two groups. I don't really live in an area where I see a lot of either, so I often have a hard time distinguishing between each. But here are some tricks I use to remember the differences. Like turtles and tortoises, it's helpful to talk about their habitats because it's a helpful way of remembering the differences of their appearance. So, habitat and appearance, they're related. Frogs are usually found in or near bodies of water. So kind of like turtles, right? You'll find them more in the water because they require moist environments for breeding and for development. Toads are more adaptable, and they can be found in a variety of habitats, including forests, including grasslands, including deserts. As a result, frogs typically have smooth, moist skin for the water, and toads tend to have dry, warty skin because they're on land. The bumps and the glands on a toad's skin secrete toxins that provide defense against predators. So again, their physical appearance is determined by their behaviors and by their threats and by their predators, etc. I think those are the main differences, but if you want a little bit more, frogs tend to have those large bulging eyes compared to toads, which have more recessed eyes. And then finally, in terms of their vocalizations, frogs tend to have that higher pitched, clearer call. Like you can tell it's a frog, that kind of quintessential frog sound, whereas toads have that lower, raspier sound. Like ravens, raspy ravens. So toads have that kind of that low bellowing sound, where frogs have more of a high-pitched call. The threats they face are similar to what we've already talked about a lot. It has to do with habitat loss, climate change, diseases, and as well invasive species who outcompete or prey on them. So there's also the pet trade, the wildlife trade, and traditional medicine, which is depleting wild populations. The traditional Chinese medicine is a problem. You can help by supporting conservation efforts, supporting legislation and policies that protect them, that reduce the wildlife trade. You can participate in habitat restoration projects. You can also make sure you have a habitat around you for especially frogs if you have any kind of water source. We don't here. I have water sources that are not natural. I have all these water fountains, and that supports the birds and some other animals. And I have lower water vessels that support the smaller mammals, or not just small mammals, the raccoons, the opossums, etc. But if you have like any kind of water source around you, a natural water source, frogs would just come there. I mean, they would just be so happy, and it's a way to protect their habitat and create habitat for them in your own backyard. So that is all I have to say about frogs and toads. And again, this is not like, I'm not giving you every single difference, because there's differences in how the eggs are laid. There's differences in what the eggs look like and if they're clusters or not. But I want to give you kind of the main differences between these animals so that you can tell on sight or by sound or by habitat which they are. The next category is rabbits versus hares. As I'm even saying this, you can probably think in your mind the difference, because the build and the size of these animals is the easiest way to tell the difference. Hares are typically much larger and rabbits tend to be, well, smaller. Hares have longer legs and longer ears. They have this slender, kind of elongated appearance. They're built for speed and they're built for agility. And you can see that in their long legs. And one of the reasons they have these long legs is because that's how they're able to manage getting away from predators. Rabbits, on the other hand, they're smaller. They have shorter legs, those cute little bunny hops that we think about as rabbits, and shorter ears. They have a more compact little rounded body. And again, I'm talking about wild rabbits and wild hares. Obviously, there's different species and there's different, sadly, breeds that have been created for both research and pets and that kind of thing. So I'm talking about wild right now, but you can already imagine the difference. The rabbits are suited for burrowing and living in dense cover. And that's also why their bodies, they don't require these long legs and speed for speed and agility, because they evade their predators by burrowing underground or living in like dense cover, whereas hares evade their predators by hopping away, because they have these long legs that enable them to do that. So hares prefer open fields and meadows. They create simple nests in tall grass or underbrush, but they don't dig burrows. On the other hand, rabbits, as I said, are burrowers. They live in complex underground systems called warrens, which you would know if you've read Watership Down ever, and other novels that feature rabbits. And these warrens provide shelter and protection from predators. They're often found in areas with abundant vegetation that supports that burrowing behavior. So those are the main differences. Hares are adapted for speed, rabbits burrow, and that's how they manage their predators. Their movements are slower, they're more cautious. Hares are just a bit more out in the open and are able to survive that way. And the rabbits also have a social structure that also enables their protection, that also supports their protection and survival. As far as the difference in their babies, I will tell you this distinction. Hares are born fully furred with their eyes wide open. They can fend for themselves shortly after birth. Rabbits, opposite. They're born hairless and blind, and they require more care from their mothers. So if you ever see baby and you're not sure if it's a hare or a rabbit, I mean, obviously if you see a baby who needs help, you're going to help them regardless. But the hairless little babies, those are rabbits, and the furred little babies, those are hares. The challenges they face: habitat loss, deforestation, of course, hunting, trapping for sport, for fur, for meat. They're also raised in factory conditions for meat, for fur. They're also kept in laboratories and are tested on. So they face many, many, many challenges, both the wild and the domestic. They can also be poisoned because they're considered pests. So lots to do. The things that I've already said: supporting conservation efforts, changing laws, abolishing testing on animals, don't eat them, don't wear them, don't buy products tested on them, encourage people to adopt rabbits from shelters rather than buying them from pet stores, especially at Easter time when children tend to get rabbits and then they don't want to keep them. I talk more about rabbits and the plights they face in a podcast episode called Rabbit Tales. Tales. Yeah, little pun. Okay, we're nearing the end here. Number 8, we have llamas and alpacas. So llamas and alpacas, they're both domesticated animals. So I think this is the first animal we're talking about who are domesticated. Both of them are domesticated. They're not wild animals. They descend from wild animals. I'll talk about them in South America, but they both are domesticated animals, and we'll talk about why and what they're used for. So the big obvious differences between llamas and alpacas: llamas are larger, They're more robust. They stand at about 5.5 to 6 feet tall at the head. Alpacas are smaller. They typically stand around 4.5 feet to 5 feet tall. So llamas are larger. Llama larger. A noticeable difference between them is in their ears. Llamas have long, curved banana-shaped ears, whereas alpacas have shorter spear-shaped ears. Additionally, llamas have longer faces with less fur on their foreheads, so they have more of an elongated appearance, while alpacas have shorter, fluffier faces with dense fleece covering their foreheads, and so it contributes to like an overall softer look of alpacas. So llamas are longer, llamas are larger in height, longer ears, longer faces, llamas. Both animals were domesticated in South America. The llama from a wild animal called a guanacos, and alpacas from a wild animal called vicuñas. Llamas have historically been used as pack animals in their native South America. They're also used as guard animals to protect herds of sheep or goats from predators because they're very alert and they're very territorial. So it is one of the non-lethal methods that people who try to get farmers, ranchers really, to use non-lethal methods to protect their herds, they will often bring llamas in to protect the herds because they do guard the herds of animals. Alpacas, on the other hand, they've primarily been raised for their hair, for their fleece, which is softer and finer than llama fleece. So they're pretty much bred for their fleece, for their fiber, which is used in textiles and clothing production. And that's because alpacas have a denser, softer coat that comes in a variety of colors. So it could be white, could be black, could be brown, could be gray, even though they're dyed as well. But llamas have coarser hair. If their hair is used, and it is, especially in South America, it's used to make rugs and ropes. But alpacas are used for, things like scarves, wraps, those kinds of things. So that's obviously one of the challenges they face. And llamas, just typically in terms of behavior, by the way, again, you've most likely been around llamas more. You'll see them more and more in the United States and in other countries because they're being farmed here for those reasons. But they tend to have, llamas do, a more aggressive personality. They tend to be very territorial. They tend to be more independent. So if you've ever been around a llama, you have to be worried that they're going to spit or kick or charge at perceived threats. Whereas alpacas are more social animals. They're often kept in herds. They tend to be more peaceful. They tend to be more cooperative. They just don't tend to have that kind of behavior. Challenges they face, like any animal who is being domesticated and raised for any purpose. Obviously, that's a problem. So, one way to help is to not wear, anything with alpaca hair, like sweaters or scarves. Don't use them as pack animals if you're traveling, even in South America, because, it's a problem. But that's what, most domesticated animals face who are being raised for their use in any way. So those are llamas and alpacas. Now moving on to an animal who's very close to my heart, who we have around us every day, and those are opossums versus possums. And this is helpful to distinguish between the two because often when people are even speaking about these animals, they are like, is it a possum or is it an opossum? Is it a possum or an opossum? I don't know. Okay, so let's get down to how to know the difference between the two. Number one, opossums. Opossums. They're native to the Americas. So if you live in the United States, you are seeing an opossum. Now, in different southern states, they have been called possums for short, and that's where some of the confusion lies. But if you are seeing one of these marsupials in the United States, and again, this is barring, some kind of captivity, an exhibition, you are seeing an opossum. They are marsupials, and these opossums, they tend to be gray and white. Those are one of the white. If you're picturing an opossum, that's what you're probably picturing. And the most well-known species is the Virginia opossum. So you see them in the South a lot, but they're everywhere in the U.S. those are opossums. Possums, without the O, are native to Australia, New Guinea, nearby islands, and that possum is usually referring to the Australian possum, not an opossum. So as I said, opossums are white and gray. They have pointed faces. They have long snouts. They have hairless prehensile tails, which mean they can grasp or hold objects. They can hang. They have a varied diet. They're opportunistic omnivores. They feed on fruits and insects and small mammals and birds and carrion. Where possums in Australia, they can be gray, they can be brown, they can be black, they can be white. They have a more rounded face and large forward-facing eyes. They have bushy tails, so very different than opossums, and they are arboreal. They spend a lot of their time in trees, and they're primarily herbivorous. So they feed mostly on leaves and flowers and fruits and sometimes insects. One of the behavior distinctions, and again, if you see this animal, it's an opossum. They are known for playing possum is what it will be called, even though it's an opossum, where they feign death or unconsciousness when they're threatened. It's a defense mechanism designed to deter predators. So they're just crazy clever animals. They are solitary. They're not aggressive towards humans. Yes, if you have, cat food outside, they're going to eat your cat food kind of like raccoons, but they are just incredible creatures. They are not aggressive towards humans. They tend not to be aggressive towards other animals as well. They are tick magnets. They eat like thousands of ticks a day. So they're really, really beneficial in so many ways, and I love them. I love opossums. We have a couple opossums here. We did do a release of an opossum who had been treated at a wildlife facility, and they were looking for a release site, and we did release two opossums here, and the one I see especially one every single night. I don't know. I think he might be the one that we released, but it's pretty cool. And then finally, one of my pet peeves. It is a pet peeve of mine. None of the others are really pet peeves because I struggle as well. But I have a pet peeve about this one. And that's the difference between bison and buffalo. Very different. Very different. And we tend to hear them used interchangeably. They are completely different species. They're both bovids, it's true. But they are found in completely different parts of the world. They look completely different. So the first way to know the difference is to know what you're looking at. So bison belong to the genus bison, and they're native to North America. There are two species of bison. There's the American bison, and then there's the European bison. But the American bison are a very commonly recognized species. They are the iconic symbols of the American West, and you see them in Yellowstone, in Montana, and Wyoming, etc. Buffalo typically refer to two species of bovids found in Africa and in Asia. You have the African buffalo and the Asian buffalo. The African buffalo is also called the Cape buffalo. So they're native to sub-Saharan Africa, known for their formidable size, aggressive temperament. Do not mess with a buffalo. Like, yes, they're vegetarian animals, but like I would be more afraid of being confronted by a Cape buffalo than I would, I don't know, I'm about to say than a lion. I don't know. Maybe I'm just going to avoid both. Now, I've seen both because we've been very fortunate to go on several safaris in sub-Saharan Africa. And if you've been with us in Botswana, or if you've seen them in Kenya or in Tanzania, that's the Cape buffalo. It's the African buffalo. The Asian buffalo, we've also seen Asian buffalo in Vietnam. They sadly are domesticated because the water buffalo was a breed of the Asian buffalo that's been domesticated. They're often used for, as draft animals, for power, for milk, for meat. And the Asian buffalo is the one who was brought to Italy 2,000 years ago by the Romans from this Indian subcontinent. And they adapted to southern Italy's climate, especially in Campania. And that's why over time, Italian farmers began using these domesticated animals for their milk. And that's why you have buffalo mozzarella. You've heard of buffalo mozzarella. They're in the southern part of Italy. You would have heard me talk about that in the episode I did as part of the series of the different cuisines in the different parts of Italy, right? So we have southern Italy, central Italy. We did Tuscany separately in central Italy. I did a separate one, and then northern Italy. So I did talk about that in that episode. But that's why you have buffalo in Italy. They are domesticated from the Asian buffalo, okay? But those are very different animals from the bison we see in the West. And I know that, there's a lot of work being done to protect the American bison, and there's an organization called, what's it called? Something Buffalo. It's like, they're not buffalo. They're bison. So those are the animals we have in the American West here. Bison are large. They are also, they're, intimidating, but they are not intimidating like buffalo are. They're large, they're robust, they're vegetarian, they have shaggy coats, they have those humped shoulders, they have those soft curved horns, they have a distinctive beard or a goatee on their chin. They have a thick mane of fur on their necks. They have a large muscular body, adapted for grazing. So they're just always kind of down on the ground, grazing on the prairies. Those are bison. The buffalo, as I said, the African buffalo, they're large, they're dark colored, they have massive curved horns, they have a stocky build, they're known for their aggressive behavior, particularly when threatened. Super scary. Asian buffalo, the water buffalo you've seen, they have broader, flatter horns. They have a more docile temperament. They've been domesticated to be so. And they might have varying coat colors. But basically, you can tell who they are based on where you are. If you're in the United States, you're probably seeing, you are seeing bison if you're in the West, especially in the wild. However, I'm sure there's African buffaloes in zoos somewhere around the U.S. I don't know. So those are the main differences. Bison are also social animals, so they live in herds. They tend to gather in large groups, especially in the winter, for protection and warmth. They're primarily grazers, as I mentioned. They're feeding on grasses, and they communicate using vocalizations and body language and scent markings. They're amazing animals. African buffalo, they are social animals. They also have large herds, and they have strong social bonds. They work together cooperatively, especially if they're defending themselves against predators. And as I mentioned, the Asian buffalo, especially the water buffalo, who you'd probably see in domesticated circumstances, they live in herds, but they're mostly managed by humans. They tend to be seen plowing fields. I saw them in Vietnam doing that. Pulling carts, saw that in Vietnam. And also they're used for their milk and meat. So they do have some similarities, but you can just tell the difference based on where you are. Bison, North America. Buffalo, Africa or Asia. Africa, they're going to be the African buffalo. They're not domesticated. Asian buffalo tend to be domesticated. Those are the water buffalo. Habitat loss, same thing, used for these purposes, especially the domesticated animals, the wild ones, hunting, obviously, and climate change, and supporting them, and especially in the American West, if you want to support the bison. I have a podcast episode I did years ago. I should update that one. Years ago on Yellowstone, because it is a big issue, because it's the cattle ranchers who are just chipping away at the protections of the American bison. And of course, the American bison have a long sordid history because of them being victims of the attempted genocide of the Native Americans here, especially in the West. I keep saying here because I'm in California, but in the West, they were victims of just massive mass slaughter. It's amazing they have survived. They are still surviving in the wild, though, because of their boundaries being so close to these ranches. It's really problematic. So you can find lots of ways to support the American bison, and a lot of that has to do with laws that are going to change the protection for ranching. And I don't know. I'm hopeful that someday that's not going to be an issue and that we're going to favor wildlife and wild habitat over domesticated livestock. We'll see. We'll see. So I hope that was helpful. I know that was a lot of information. I hope you found it interesting. I know it's probably easier when you see something like this as a blog post and you can see a picture right away. But I wanted to give you other ways to noticing the difference. I wanted to talk about their vocalizations and their habitats and locations and that kind of thing. So I hope that's helpful. I can't wait to hear from you. If you like this episode, if you've learned from it, if you've applied any of these mnemonics to noticing the difference, and I hope you pass them on, and you are going to sound like a smarty pants because you're going to be able to tell the difference yourself and you're going to be able to tell them how to tell the difference. So I hope it's helpful for the animals. This is Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. Thanks for listening.